Hi, and welcome to your Embedded Ethics module on encoding human values in technology. Let's begin by talking about the main framework of values in design. Now, this entire framework is based on the idea that design decisions are expressive of what we care about. When we create a certain technology and we design the features of that technology, those decisions encode our values, including efficiency, privacy, beauty, truth, fairness, sustainability, and others. Take the example of Pi. This is a personal AI or a conversational bot that was designed more or less recently by the company Inflection AI. Now, a personal AI is designed to provide a conversational partner for people who cannot, or for some reason don't want to, have conversations with other human beings. Now, this kind of technology may be driven by values such as empathy, respect, solidarity, kindness, support, etc. You can see how these values are quite apparent in the kind of language that is generated by the chatbot and the kinds of conversations that it offers to users. It is embedded into the user interface and all kinds of features that are part of the technology. Now, in the case of Pi, values emerge quite clearly from the designer's definition of the problem that the technology tries to address, and the specification of design features that allow the product to solve that problem. Now, these decisions on the part of the designer interact with users' perceptions and the broader context in which the design is employed. Now, when trying to identify the values coded into any form of technology, there's two things that we should do: locate these values and define them. So let me talk about each of these in turn. To locate values, we need to look at the key influences that shape the design process. This includes looking at who are the key actors, the designers, of course, but also who are the shareholders, who are the users. Then there's the functional description. What problem or need is this technology addressing? It may turn out to be that the very problem or the very target that is sought by the technology is specified in terms of values. Take the example of privacy-enhancing web browsers. Now, one thing we should also look at is constraints. These constraints may be economic, they may be technical, they may be commercial, they may be legal, and all of these shape design decisions that will then end up embedding one value or another into the technology. And lastly, there's societal input. So culture and social mores will shape what we can do and how it is interpreted by users. Now, having identified these sources of influence, you want to consider how they shape the design, in what ways they channel users and others' interpretations of the values that are embedded in that design. Now, here I want to call your attention to a very important concept that Helen Nissenbaum refers to as collateral values. These are values that crop up as side effects of design decisions, even though they're not intended by designers. So if you remember, the values that are coded into a product like Pi, they're quite explicit and quite deliberate. Now, collateral values are not like that. They arise or they emerge from the way in which the design interacts with the world. Now, these are important because they may drive serious wedges between what designers intend to express and what they end up expressing in their design. They drive wedges between intentions and actual impacts in the world. One particular way in which values may unintendedly crop up is through standardization. Standardization happens when we make implicit assumptions about who the standard user is for a given technology, or who the standard person is who is going to benefit from this technology. Now, this is crucial because default assumptions are often a reflection of existing power imbalances. And when they go unquestioned, they contribute to reinforce those imbalances by unwillingly discriminating against those who do not resemble that standard user or the standard person that is meant to benefit from this technology. Biases play a crucial role in standardization, and these may include pre-existing biases that are already in society, in culture, or in institutions, technical biases, or emergent biases, biases that emerge when the product is used in a context that is different from its original context of use. So, when we assume that a certain standard user for a product is the person that we're going to be designing for, we assume that everybody else is a non-standard user. And this places a burden of sorts on members of the groups that we fail to consider or that we fail to include in our design, because it is harder for them to use the product and to benefit from it. Sometimes that's okay. Every single decision that we make places burdens on some people and not others. Every single decision that we make provides benefits to some people and not others. But these decisions aggregate. And if all of the burdens fall on the same group or groups of people, then we enter into problems of distributive justice. Now, a lot of decisions about what can be offered and what needs to be addressed may be constrained by technical or economic consideration, but some aren't. And it's important that we treat them as decisions about who we are benefiting when we design technology in a certain way. Here's one interesting example of how bias can be encoded into an AI system, and how bias can be encoded by taking one default viewpoint. So, Perspective API offers an automated detection of toxic contents and toxicity mitigation, which is crucial when you're building a large language model, but also for tasks like semi-automated content moderation that happens in digital platforms or in public forums of all kinds. Now, in a paper that was published a couple of years ago by researchers from DeepMind, they analyzed the toxicity scores generated by Perspective API and how they impacted different groups of people. One of their key insights was to look into the definition of toxicity. If you see on the screen, the definition of toxicity is rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable language that is likely to make someone leave a discussion. Now, the authors of this paper noticed that this definition already builds biases into the system. For one thing, it is somewhat subjective and dependent on the cultural background of whoever is rating a piece of content and the kinds of sensitivities that they might have. For another thing, it covers only a subset of possibly harmful content. It does not cover, for instance, harmful stereotypes that may be perpetuated by something like an LLM. But most importantly, this definition prioritizes the interests of the main customers for Perspective API, namely the digital platforms that are using these toxicity mitigation tools, right? For these customers, their business model depends on user engagement, right? So a definition of toxicity that focuses on what makes somebody leave a discussion is one that seeks to protect the interests of those customers. However, this definition does not necessarily build in the interests of users themselves. So there's one group that is being prioritized whose interests are being prioritized over others. This constitutes a good example of collateral values cropping up through default assumptions that get built into something as basic as the definition of the key metric in Perspective AI. So once that we have located the values that are explicitly or implicitly embedded in design decisions, it is important to define values. Why is that? Because ethical and political values are abstract, controversial, and difficult to define. Definition and analysis allows us to connect abstract values that we want to encode or embed in our technologies to concrete design features. If values are not well defined, products can entirely miss their marks. So it is not simply a matter of philosophical exercise. It's a way of securing that you embed the values that you actually want to embed into the technologies that you create. Think about an example that I find really interesting. So thinking about some of Microsoft's early chatbots from around 10 years ago. Microsoft tried to create chatbots that were inclusive to people. Now, if you want to make something inclusive, one possible definition of inclusion is to make a technology that is welcoming to any kind of content and any kind of topic that users are interested in. That was the approach that was taken by Microsoft when they designed their now infamous tie. Tie was, as you may know, targeted by a campaign coordinated on 4chan and ended up becoming highly racist and sexist in a matter of hours, to the point that Microsoft had to take it down. Now, after Tie, Microsoft designed Zo. And Zo had a different definition of inclusion, namely, protecting vulnerable users from insult and psychological harm. And the way that it did it was by blacklisting certain words of topics and rejecting any conversation that went into those areas. Now that also led to the outright exclusion of users who wanted to talk about, say, being bullied for religious reasons. So that didn't quite do the job either. The point here is that the definition of inclusion was something that needed to be considered more carefully in this case, so that the products did not miss the mark completely, as these two chatbots did. Now, to finalize, I want to talk about value conflicts. Now, value conflicts are a crucial part of the story because they are ubiquitous. Not just in technology, but everywhere. We are used to discussing value conflicts in policy making or in politics, but also in design decisions. They're important. They arise even in relatively uncontroversial contexts. And this is not the result of poor design. It is the inevitable consequence of recognizing that different things matter to us, to different degrees sometimes, but often to the same degree. And that makes it hard to choose between things that are truly important. This is a result of value pluralism, which we recognize as a society. Now, although these conflicts are everywhere, and although they may appear intractable, this does not mean that we should throw up our hands. Rather, we should strive to make deliberate, conscientious, and responsible choices in how we deal with these value conflicts. The Values and Design Framework describes 3 different approaches to value conflicts. There's dissolving the conflict, which means finding an alternative path that avoids the conflict entirely. There's compromising, which means making design decisions that put boundaries on some values to protect others and vice versa. So finding some kind of middle ground where some part of what we value on both sides may be attained. And lastly, there is trading off, which means that we simply decide to prioritize one value and sacrifice others for its sake. Now, different situations may call for different approaches, but what matters again is that these decisions are made deliberately and responsibly, that we know that we are making sacrifices, and how these sacrifices are likely to impact different people so that we can, to the best of our capacity, mitigate the negative impacts of our decisions. And that is all. Thank you very much.